welcome everyone. I'm Grandmaster Denes Boros, and welcome to the new and renovated St. Louis Chess Club. And I'm back with the Masters class as usual. And Ben Simon is here to make sure everything goes as smooth as silk. The games I brought, they're gonna focus on dominating chess. And you might be wondering, well, what do you mean dominating chess? Well, it really is controlling the events that happen on the board, controlling whatever your opponent can do in some certain cases. So this game, the first one that I want to show, is between Harikrishna and Sargissian. Sargissian is a very well-known Armenian grandmaster who actually shined playing the chess Olympiad and multiple times Olympic champion. Harikrishna is the second generation of top Indian players since Vishy Anand. Now, of course, there are plenty of new generations you might be familiar with, but Harikrishna is sort of second in line, and he was supposed to be the one taking the torch from Vishy. Now, let's get it started. Vishy's, Harikrishna, that is, my bad, is playing white. So it is, of course, everyone's favorite, even though still bishop b5 is best by test. The Spanish is still unchallenged as being the most principled, but bishop c4 has been gaining, and this was sort of the time where this also just gained traction. This is still the early days. It's not as well defined as it is today. So c3, d3, d6, castles, h3, knight d2, a5. Now already that's sort of like a newer flick that hadn't been done for a bit. Everybody and their grandma used to play a6 and make sure the bishop can hide on a7. If knight a5, that kind of invites idea of b4, double attacking the knight and bishop, but I can also sort of transpose in kind of like a Spanish type position, which white would love to have without the theory that's added. That's sort of the main point of the Italian. They're trying to get a fighting game without the heavy theory of the Spanish. So knight d2, a5. Now, earlier on in these lectures, I taught about Vishy playing Aronian in the candidates tournament. The point being is the same. White wants to get the bishop back, threatens the sly idea of even trapping the bishop. If black is unsuspecting, hop, there goes the bishop. So black has to be alert. a6 or a5, doesn't really matter. a5 might be a little bit more accurate, but the whole point is white is trying to gain some space. So what they figured with black, well, what if I use the same methods reversed, and what if black actually goes pawn a7 to a5, stopping these b4 expansions and just gain space for the price of 1, that b5 square. Rook e1, bishop e6. And here comes sort of the big question of how to follow up. Now, at first glance, all of these positions look so similar, and they are, but these tiny differences sort of make or break of how well you play these positions. So the question will be, how should we follow up as white? There are a couple of ways of playing this position, but feel free to try your hand at it. If you come up with something unusual, maybe even suspect, don't worry about it. It's best if you try it out, and I'll let you know if you're close or not. Bishop b3 theory. Bishop b3 is never not theory. Bishop b3 is obviously a very solid move. Black could maybe even consider taking, not necessary but possible, and black can go something like here and d5, or even just wait a little bit and then eventually go pawn to d5. Interestingly enough, this bishop on c5 can go different ways. It can go back to a7, go drop back to f8. It's not necessarily decided immediately where that bishop should go. Bishop takes, so forks, it's sort of the first thing that we think about. But in this case, the idea of taking is actually very interesting and is played often, although the pawn is usually on a6 in that case. Here the issue is with this attack, it seems like you're winning something, but black can do the very prudent queen c8, defending those guys, or the more sly queen d7, and if you take, oh, there goes the lady. So black is sort of ready for this trick. And sort of the difference is, usually if white manages to get some pawn pushes, those positions are much more favorable for white. Here, as you may notice, black already took away this b4 push idea, which we sort of can, once we are stopped from playing b4, we don't have that extra space advantage that white can usually bank on. d4, that's not a bad plan, but for now, we've got 1, 2, 3 attacking, and we've got only 2 defending a d4 push, so we're not quite ready for that yet. Now, I already mentioned that these positions are very similar to the Spanish. There are some ideas that you can sort of use even in these type of positions. You're not quite ready for d4, but there are moves that could help you prepare such a break. You could, yes, as Nick says, bishop b5 definitely is an idea. Wasn't played in this game, but it doesn't mean it's bad. Point being, eventually, either if the knight moves, then you can get your d4 push in, and white at least has a firm grip in the center. And if black just goes full ignorance, then we can even take, and then we can go for the d4 break, with the idea of technically double attacking the bishop and the pawn. You can't quite just drop the pawn. It'll cost you a pawn. And if you take, then white actually accomplished something. You've got 2 center pawns, and black has a weakness on c6. And it definitely is something to play for. And these bishops, they don't really have a lot of targets. So white can at least claim a symbolic advantage. So, yeah. Bishop b3, bishop takes, bishop b5, they're all typical ideas. Yes? Yes, Nick? b3 is also interesting, yes, which is among the weirder looking moves. The upside is that you can sort of prepare bishop b2 d4, which is unusual looking.
You kind of borrow the Benoni ideas of expanding on the queen side.
Yeah. Yes, so bishop b2 d4. Only issue is that that bishop looks a little weird on c4 now. But, you know, if it works, it may just work. So chess sometimes does act like that. Okay, so the other moves don't really work that much. These sort of the main ideas. And the last one, which actually Harikrishna played, pawn a4. Very solid play, straightforward. Bishop takes c4. And bishop takes c4, even though a natural move, one of the things that white is sort of struggling with is that bishop on c1. That bishop on c1 isn't really participating. When black takes voluntarily, it does help our knight get a good spot. Rook e8, bishop e3, trades, queen d7. And you might be wondering, rightfully so, that where did our pieces go? There's just so many trades. However, even in this case, our pieces, the knight on e3 and f3, they control really important squares, and this knight on f6, it's more of a defensive piece. So it will only be useful when white is ready to plunge into some action. Right now, it's just sitting there. So our goal really will be is to come up with a plan of moving our pieces forward. But first of all, and this is something you'll have to figure out, which side of the board should we start our operations? That should be the first question you're asking yourself. And one of the tricks that grandmasters use, they check out where the opponent's pieces are. My first guess would be that black has plenty of pieces on the queen side. Therefore, it makes ultimately a good choice to play on the king side instead. Now, if you go king h2, I don't mind that move, but I'm not sure how it helps your game plan. Now, interestingly enough, pawn g4 ideas do come to the fore at times, but here you just don't have that almighty Spanish bishop to support that type of aggression, and even then, it's very risky play. But all that said, our knight is actually controlling some pivotal squares, and we can kind of connect both the queen and the two knights, sort of creating a fusion, and will help those pieces work together perfectly well. So your idea and your plan should be a move that connects those three. Knight h4? Okay, knight h4 is interesting. It's not what he did, and definitely you can do something like this. However, probably black can sort of react with the somewhat clumsy knight e7. It feels like a win for us, but if we trade, that's definitely good for black. And the only downside of knight h4 that it's very direct. So it doesn't give you many options. So one of the annoying things with these positions that black can go, well, black can even move the knight away. But one typical idea is going full turtle mode and just drop back in g6. And you may try as hard as you'd like, but it's very difficult to break black's position. There might be a slight bit of an advantage. Knight h7 might be even better for black. I mean, a better choice. So I feel that for the moment, this might be just a little bit too aggressive play. Harikrishna's move is a little bit more circumspect. He goes to h2 and sort of wants the same thing as you do, but it's a little bit more strategic, sort of combining the idea of bringing the queen to f3 and the knight to g4. Because if you capture, I might consider capturing back with the pawn and using my pawn as a battering ram. Queen f3, rook d8, and these are those type of positions where white is ever so slightly better, and it's just very uncomfortable for black to play. Not that black is in deep trouble or anything like that. So knight g4, of course you're trying to undermine the knight, and Sargissian decides to move it away. Now of course takes, we would take with the pawn, and eventually either g5 or the long-term plan of just piling up with king g2, rook h1, rook h2, rook ah1. And yeah, black will make a couple of moves, but white's plan is so easy to play. White's play is just easier to do, and white has the initiative. Winning, that'd be kind of a stretch, but definitely a comfortable position. So knight h7, queen g3, eyeing the king. Of course, that's a cheapo. Black doesn't fall for that. d4. And now you can see that even though it's not a huge advantage that white accomplished, but white does have 2 pawns versus 1, and we also have a target on e5. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking dominating chess. Black is being dominated. Black does not really have true counterplay. There's no real target that black could latch onto. Therefore, black is condemned to a long, arduous defense, which, of course, white is always looking forward to because it's all Grandmaster's dreams. So h5. h5 is something you don't want to play, but it kind of shows that the pressure is kind of getting to black. Knight c6, still trying to be stable. Now, d5 is a move that feels tempting to play, but then all that initiative that white plays just fades away. And black actually can get sort of a King's Indian type of play on the king side, and white sort of runs out of fuel. Yeah, white wants to play, both wants to play on the king side, but white is just a couple of tempos ahead. Knight f3, e takes, knight f5. So black is hoping to use that trick, but with this knight f5 move, there's a double attacking going on. We hit on g7, we hit on d4, g6, knight takes d4. And now we kind of reach the moment where white actually gained that tiny edge because you got that e4 pawn, and black is sort of lacking that space, still lacking that space. Now, what becomes kind of difficult for both sides, that it's going to be difficult for black to move and incredibly difficult for white to break through, because anytime these two armies will clash, the trades will be coming in, and with every trade, the position will become more and more drawish. And for the moment, it doesn't seem apparent, but that will become a thing. So knight e5, b3. White is trying to build up the classic Maroczy bind. Queen e7, rook d1. Again, it's all about reducing counterplay, not letting black jump around. And in that sense, maybe black should have tried to jump around a little bit just to fluster white. Because after this, it's going to be progressively harder for black to do anything. c6, and whenever black starts playing these type of moves, that's again a concession, because this d6 pawn is a potential target, and as you'll see, that will be the cause of the downfall. So knight h4, knight d7. And this is the moment we're going to stop, and I'll ask y'all to find white's idea. What white did is somewhat, we could put it mildly surprising, but I can actually attest to this idea. It's much more deep than it looks, and it really has to do with the basics of chess and kind of the quality of pieces. But I'm actually running ahead here. It is white to move. White has quite a nice move here, which I hope you'll find, or try to find. Even if all the pieces get traded off, it seems easier for white to create a kingside passer? For sure, but we're not quite there yet. In fact, never lose sight of your opponent's mistakes. And I do feel that black sort of overextended here, just a slight bit, and that's enough for Harikrishna to pounce on that weakness. Quasi got it. Knight f5. And it doesn't feel like it's a big deal, but it actually is quite a great idea by Harikrishna. Well, white will just win a pawn if you don't react. Otherwise, it'd be a double attack. You have to capture. White captures. So we're having a single pawn for the piece. Queen g5, queen takes, knight takes d6. And you might be wondering, okay, it's a couple of pawns, but isn't a piece worth 3, and isn't a piece in general much more valuable than those pawns? And the answer is, first of all, it's complicated, but in reality, as you'll see, those knights aren't quite good enough. So rook e7, f4, you want to, of course, push those knights away. e5, and because these knights are sort of landlocked pieces, they can only play on the side where they're at, so this knight will most probably not participate on the queen side. Having those extra pawns over here will be a great advantage for the white player. So king g8, trying to over-defend whatever they can. If you move the rook away, you already have knight f5. If I win the piece, and I'm already up a pawn, it's game over. So king g8, knight takes, rook a8, knight d6. Notice how Harikrishna is very patient with his play. He's not rushing too much, because black can't really do much anyways. These pieces are quite awful. Knight c5, knight f5, rook b7, rook e3. And because this knight is stuck on the queen side and is not really participating in defending the king, black is in trouble. So knight e6, desperately trying to claw his way back. Check. Knight d6, f5, the pawns start rolling. Rook d3. And now you can see that these knights not having any stable outposts anymore, that e6 spot has been denied. Black is actually pushed to the brim. The reason they didn't take the pawn, they felt this knight was needed for the defense of the king. Like there would be similar knight d6 ideas. So king g8, rook g3, rook f1, and black is getting smashed. f6, rook g6, knight e8. Do we trade the knight? We don't trade the knight because that's actually where our advantage lies. Those knights are so passive, if we trade it off, that's when black actually gets to untangle. So rook d5, e6, and because these knights can't move around so freely, black is near lost. Rook e5, rook f4, rook h6, attacking the knight, takes, knight g7, and this is the moment where black thought, oh, the worst is over for me. I'm hitting the rook, hitting the pawn, but it turns out that white has a beautiful finishing touch. Rook h7, yes. And of course, takes. So if rook takes e4, I can do rook takes g7, as Nick says, takes, and I take this. So king takes h7 is the last big question.
Oh, actually,
Rook h4, and rook h4 is actually an important move, because if you take here, my king will crawl through the window and it'll try its chances to escape. But after rook h4 check, you can't really run, can't hide. If I check you, that's not quite enough, so it's never too late to lose a winning game. But we have knight d7 check, so of course the fork, you must take this. E takes. Rook d5 feels like the right move, however, we check. King e7, f6, forkaroo. If you take here, I take here, I'm promoting. If you take this, I queen. And of course, this endgame is completely lost. Therefore, Sargissian resigned. So, this was the game between Harikrishna and Sargissian, where the key concept was that you don't actually mind to get a couple of pawns, 2 and then 3, if those knights are awkwardly placed around the board. And that's sort of one of the secrets of chess. Knights are kind of the trickiest pieces on a chessboard. They can be spectacular when you're attacking, spectacular when you're playing blitz, and terrible when they don't have a goal and they're just meandering around. So, let's move on to the highlighted game, Wesley So versus Magnus Carlsen. Now, Wesley has sort of been a tough opponent for Magnus, and you'll see just why that is the case. So, e4, Magnus actually likes to have lively games and fighting for a win, but it's actually difficult to play and do against Wesley because Wesley is a solid player. So no surprise, Carlsen is going very aggressive. So e4, c5, knight f3, d6. So if you're asking Sonics, I'm covering the topic of how to play dominating chess, so it's not tournament specific. So bishop b5, bishop d7. Now d4, of course, is the main line and has been played by the best of the best. Talking about best of the best, both Vichy and both Kasparov plays the open Sicilian, which is, of course, d4, takes, takes, and the open variation, and most of the time the Najdorf. And by the way, they are going to be playing their matches here at the chess club around 3 p.m. CT, Central Time, that is. So Wesley is like, I don't want to be part of this nonsense. He's trying to keep it solid and just get that Maroczy type position, fairly similar to what we've seen in the previous game. Bishop d7 takes, c4. And, well, what Wesley is doing is somewhat psychological. Also, he's trying to avoid that reams of theory that Carlsen would like to inflict on him. g6, takes. It's all theory. And this is the moment I'll stop for a second. Queen d8 is quite a smart move by Magnus. It actually gives this spot for the knight on d7, so it can go and play in this Maroczy style. Also, the queen wants to go to a5. The queen really has no business being on d7. So queen d2, queen a5. Rook d1, knight d7. Now, you may notice that white's position is just slightly easier to play. If we're being genuine with our thoughts, it's not much, and most likely the game is balanced with correct play. However, Wesley kind of understood that Carlsen is kind of uncomfortable playing these because he just would like to get winning chances. But that's not going to come easy against Wesley. So knight e2. Now, black could have even tried to trade here, but that would have run counter of what Carlsen is trying to do. Knight e2. Wesley is not giving second chances. That's what makes Wesley Wesley. He doesn't let black start trading on d4, which would lead to more or less easy equality. He keeps pieces on the board, and now what will be kind of difficult as black is to find a specific plan. a6, a4, e6. And you might actually notice the synchronicity between this game and the previous one. If you will look it up, notice that there are some unforced weakenings in both positions in both games. Here, black voluntarily gives up this idea and that pawn on d6. Now, of course, it's taboo to take right now because of counter tactics, but that's sort of the point. White is trying to restrict black's play, and black is desperately trying to create something very dynamic, even at the cost of a weakened d-pawn. Yeah, a4 seems wild, but as you'll see, it's not as bad as it may look. This b-pawn is easily defended, and it's very difficult for black to win. So rook b1, case in point, Wesley goes and over-defends and over-protects all these pawns before they would become a target. Rook d8, bishop g5, rook e8. Now here already Wesley could have faced bishop f6 and probably would have been a better move. Black could face bishop e3, and then suddenly we're almost repeating. Now, of course, that's not at all forced. White can also go bishop f4, but bishop f6 again sort of runs counter of what it's kind of running counter of what Carlsen is trying to do. So rook e8, again keeping the pieces on the board, but white still has a substantial advantage. And now Wesley slowly improves his position. Note that now he controls the d8 square, so defending that pawn will be progressively more difficult. So bishop f4, knight e5, h3. That pawn actually is a bigger weakness, so sometimes you don't want to take it. You'd rather just leave it hanging just for the reason that black will have to take a lot of time defending it. So rook d8, king h2. Moving away from this dangerous diagonal. And king h2 is always debatable. It's never quite clear if you should go to h1 or h2. Probably h2 is best because if you ever get a back rank check, you don't have to move out of the way. Only thing that could run counter to that if this diagonal ever opens up, but Wesley is predicting it quite well that that's not going to be an issue for him, especially with a strong bishop on f4. So queen b4, bishop g5. Still, it's more like he's trying to annoy Carlsen than anything else. He's really just poking the bear. f6, but it is working because black again voluntarily weakens his pawn structure. And even though f6 is by no means a mistake because black wants to play dynamically, but it is something we could definitely consider risky chess. Bishop e3, knight f7, f4, f5. But the thing with risky chess is that it might actually objectively not great, or if it is good, you are walking on thin ice. So takes, knight d4, d5, takes, e takes. Still can't touch this, because I can take on c3. Bishop g1. Notice that what Wesley is doing, he's holding the fort. He's just making sure he's not running into any sort of tricks that Carlsen might set up. And he's saying, well, in general, based on the foundation of the position, he should be okay, or at least slightly better. So he's not really letting it go. Exactly, Sonics. That's exactly what he's trying to do. He's just keeping the pressure and is trying to provoke Magnus. So knight d6, which is a very clever little move, with some knight e4 ideas. So if takes, knight can take, knight e4. So there are some nasty tricks up in the air, which you have to be aware of. And if knight takes, and I take the rook, so this would be beneficial for black. But of course, Wesley is just going to step out of all these tricks, make sure knight e4 doesn't come with an attack both on the knight on c3 and d2. Knight e4, knight ce2. Again, practically just stonewalling the Viking, not letting anything come through. And even though that knight on e4 looks pretty cool, it doesn't do too much because there's nothing that it can attack. Nothing over there. Knight takes d4, another trade, another good moment for Wesley. Takes, knight takes d4. And interestingly enough, this is the last moment Magnus had a chance to complicate matters, and he had to go for knight to c3. And black actually will get an exchange for the hardships. Probably he wasn't too happy with queen takes f5, and white not only will get a pawn for the exchange, but also some nasty ideas against the black king. So Carlsen sort of backed out of that, played king h8, but now, believe it or not, this is his last chance. Carlsen is going to go through some troubling times. Knight f2 would run into queen g3 check, which is something I'm pretty sure Wesley would have been keen to see on the board. So king h8, rook c1, queen d6, queen e3. Again, over defending, and now strategically black is on the verge of collapsing. This d pawn is firmly blocked. The f pawn is a constant weakness, and white actually has a 3 versus 2 on the queen side. So if you think about it, just by dominating the key squares, Wesley built a slight to a large advantage. I would still give it like a slight advantage for now, but you'll see that in a moment of time it'll be huge. So knight g5, queen f2, queen h4. Wesley plays aggressively when he needs to, and this is the time to do it because the queen not only defends there, we are sort of starting to poke around black's position. Rook f8, rook c2. Again, over defending everything. Queen g6, rook c7, coming in there. Rook g8, rook g1. And what's kind of annoying for Magnus is that there is no clear target that he can attack. The only thing that he could go for, like a direct attack against the king, is easily guarded by that rook on g1, and fun time is sort of over for black. Rook c8, rook takes b7. Wesley is not afraid of no ghosts. Knight e6, coming in. Rook c2, knight g5. And, well, many players get a little bit too excited and they don't actually pay attention to potential counterplays. But here, Wesley is not that type of player. He knows what Magnus wants, and Magnus wants blood. But he's not getting it today, because after knight g5, it kind of curtains. This attack just dies down. Rook g7, rook b8, rook g8, takes, knight takes, d takes. So we're going to slow down here a little bit and just take stock of what happened. White gained a pawn, but black does have a protected passer, and one that is not that far from promoting. Still some distance away, but it's not an eternity. It definitely can reach the finish line. So even though Magnus is on the back foot, it's not quite over yet. So the real question that I'm asking is, how should we follow up if we're playing white here, as Wesley saw? Because so far so good. Wesley defended very well. He stifled that attack on the king side, but there's still a game to win. Well, black might seem to be better, but he is down a pawn, and always notice the difference between the kings. This king has plenty of pawns just hugging the king over at the king side, while black is completely opened up, and there's no pieces nor pawns providing shelter for the king. Queen d8, okay, I might just go king g7 in that case.
Queen e7, watch the e pawn, then we'll push your b pawn.
Okay, so queen e7. So the thing is that I might even consider an endgame for black. Because even though you have the extra pawn, so let's say you go here, I go queen f7, and just for a moment, if you trade here, these pawns might not be that fast, and if I manage to block you and run my passed pawn, there is some semblance of chance for black to hold the game. Now what Wesley does, it just shows how deeply talented he is. Kind of understands when the moment arises. And this move is somewhat surprising at first glance, but then you realize, wait a minute, this is genius. You might believe there's nothing much happening because there's just so few pieces on the board, but what he does is somewhat surprising. Before I might even start running my pawn myself, or just go behind the pawn, unless I'm dropping something. I might be dropping. No, I'm not dropping anything, because check here, check, queen f6. Yeah, g4 is not quite legal yet. If we go queen g3, we sort of go for a trade that we sort of try to avoid in the first place. Again, just consider the difference between these two kings. I will redden this one because it's not as ideal as its counterpart. And if your opponent's king is weak, you may as well want to go after it. Okay. Well, in some cases, you just wonder, okay, my queen is amazing, it's useful, it's probably going to partake in the attack. But what about our rook? Well, our rook ain't really participating much apart from defending that pawn. So it's time to get that rook back to business. And as you people pointed out correctly, king h1. And it feels like, well, what's happening? What do you mean? King g7. And here comes the g pawn. Now, it looks incredibly dangerous to do this, but even if black would go something like queen c6, well, you'll be the one checkmated first, and you don't even have time for that single move of e3, which would win you the game. So there's g takes f. Oh, it's a check, and now you're going to get mated. Yeah, that is correct. If you had this one in mind, you found it. So because black is just a tempo behind, it's not going to work. Now, you definitely had to make sure the g pawn is protected. If you move your rook away, there are some checkmating ideas on g2. So it was sort of a must to go with this idea of king h1 and g4, making sure your rook can move around. King f7, and sort of it curtains, because g takes, queen takes, rook g5, and this queen, unluckily, or luckily for white, unlucky for black, but lucky for white, you can't move to e4. And if you can't stay there, I'm gonna take the pawn and with a checkmating attack. And if you go there, I'm probably not even gonna bother. I might just checkmate you. Or, if I'm a simple person, I might just take the queen. It really depends on your style. So black decided to give a couple of checks, but it's more or less just spy checks. White just keeps rolling until it runs out. Sadly, there's no queen a5 because the rook follows that queen like a shadow, and it is game over. And for that reason, Magnus resigned. It's annoying I saw g4 says Sonics, because I saw it's illegal, then I let go. Never let go. That's sort of the key of that. Just because it doesn't work the first time, it doesn't mean it won't work out another second time. Black could have gone king f7, but probably g4 came as somewhat of a surprise. And even if you go to f7, like if the queen moves away, even here, as you can see it, have queen takes h7 check, and your king is still too exposed. Here you get mated, and if you go here, then I am just going to skewer the queen. So it doesn't really matter where you put it. In each and every case, you are running into a decisive attack. If you check here, doesn't do too much. I just go king d2. And you might give a couple of spy checks, but then eventually I just pick those pieces up like berries. So I really hope you all enjoyed this lecture. Don't forget, tomorrow is the big match between Garry Kasparov and Vishy Anand. So do check out our YouTube, or if you're in town, live, because it's going to be a doozy. It's going to be a very, very cool match. So when did he resign? He resigned after rook c2, king e1. What time? 3 p.m. Central. That's when the games will start. Okay, so thank you so much for coming, and have a good day or night wherever you are.